Having sales conversations with potential clients can be terrifying. Why? Because we feel judged. And the reality is we are being judged. That's what the sales conversation is all about. My name is Cecilia Poullain. Welcome to the Pathway to Partnership podcast, a podcast designed specifically for women lawyers. My name is Cecilia Poullain, and I'm a coach for women lawyers who want to make partner. Each week on the podcast, we explore the 3 pillars of my Pathway to Partnership program: clarity, confidence, and client development. And today we're going to talk about something that many people dread: sales. For a lot of women lawyers, selling their services feels very uncomfortable. It feels pushy and it feels sleazy. But if you want to make partner, and if you want to be an effective partner, sales is an extremely important part of the job. Today we're exploring how to bring different energies to your sales conversations so that they feel natural, credible, and effective. And I want to start with a story. Late one Friday afternoon last year, I spoke to a potential coaching client. She had been treated appallingly by her employer. She was on sick leave, and she was so distressed that her psychiatrist suggested that she go on antidepressants. On the Friday, she said she was interested in working with me, but wanted to talk it over with her husband over the weekend. So we arranged to speak again on the following Monday. When she got on the phone on the Monday, the first thing she said was, "I'm really sorry, Cecilia, but I've decided not to work with you. I'm not in any fit state to do this work right now." I acknowledged what she said, and then I asked her permission to coach her. During the call, she was frequently in tears, but by the end of the conversation, she was smiling and even laughing. I then switched my energy from passive to assertive and said to her, without even asking her opinion, "Actually, based on the conversation we've just had, you can't afford not to work with me." I was giving her my view as an expert. I knew I could help her. I knew I could keep her off the antidepressants. I knew that she wasn't depressed. She was grieving. And to my delight, she agreed. And within 2 months, she had received 3 job offers and it had accepted one. Most importantly, she was back to her usual cheerful self. I'm sharing this story because it's an example of the different energies we need to bring to sales conversations. Listening deeply, then showing up as an expert. In this episode, we're going to look at why sales is such a problem for women lawyers and how to make it easier. So why is sales a problem? The main reason is emotional. Having sales conversations with potential clients can be terrifying. Why? Because we feel judged. And the reality is we are being judged. That's what the sales conversation is all about. And if the person we're talking to says no, we can go into a confidence tailspin because we can feel as though they're judging us as people, and we start to think, "I'm not good enough." Or we go into the black and whites, the absolutes. We start to think, "I will never bring in enough work. I will never be able to bring in enough cash. I will never be able to support a team." And for sole practitioners or small firms, it's even worse. We start to think, if they say no, my business will go under. This is the end. So our emotional reaction to being judged is the first problem. The second problem is we don't know how to sell. As with so many of these things, as I say over and over again on this podcast, we're expected to know how to sell without anyone ever teaching us. But sales is a whole profession unto itself. In a few minutes, you will learn a simple sales conversation structure that will get you on your way. A related problem specifically for women lawyers, and even more specifically for younger women lawyers, is that they find it hard to establish their credibility with older men. That power dynamic can be very difficult. And interestingly, they also say that it is sometimes even harder to convince a GC who is a woman than a general counsel who is a man. Another difficulty is that women can face a double bind if they're too aggressive in their sales conversations. Some people don't like being challenged or having their authority and expertise put at risk, particularly by a woman. If the lawyer is assertive and acts in the way a man might act, then she can be judged as aggressive, even when she isn't actually being particularly aggressive. However, if she doesn't stand up and say what she thinks, then she can be seen as weak or not credible. Either way, she loses. Many women are great at listening to their clients and understanding their problems, but in a sales conversation they feel less confident, proving why they are the best person for the job. And this part of the conversation can make them feel very anxious. And finally, when the client starts to object and push back, and particularly on price, if we aren't confident enough and don't fully believe in the unique value we can bring to that particular client, we can cave into their demands and then bitterly regret it. So those are just a few of the reasons why sales conversations can be difficult. Before we get into the structure for sales conversations, I'd like to give you just a little bit of context. First, let's start by looking at what is sales. And let's start by defining what it is not. Sales is not positioning, it's not finding your niche, it's not your speciality. That's the work you need to do well before you get into the sales conversation. And if you'd like to know more about that, then check out episode 7. And sales isn't marketing. Marketing is all about making sure that people know you exist and moving them through the know, like, trust funnel. And if you'd like to know more about that, then check out episode 8. That's what sales isn't. Sales is the conversation with a potential client when the client and you are deciding whether they are going to hire you or your firm as a lawyer, and you are deciding if you want to work with them as a client. This is a two-way conversation. A sales conversation can take the form of a formal pitch, a Teams call, a coffee in a coffee shop, or an in-person visit. That's my first point on context. And the second point is this: if there is an RFP, you need to ask yourself whether you actually want to respond. If you know that you aren't the right lawyer for this client or this case and have very little chance of winning, it may be a better use of your time to simply not respond. And sometimes you will know that you're the token, you're the benchmark bid, in which case you may want to respond in order to maintain good relationships with the client, but not waste too much time. In certain situations, there is no sales conversation. I understand that more and more often large corporate clients are asking their law firms to pitch for work online by responding to an online questionnaire. I think that's a real shame because it doesn't leave much room for the firm to differentiate their value. And I suspect that in this case, the only thing the client is really looking at is price. But I also understand that even in this situation, when there is a formal RFP online, there is actually a sales conversation, but it happens afterwards when the client asks to chat with a lawyer informally over a coffee. So that's the third point I wanted to make about context. And sometimes when a client is referred to you, for example, the sales conversation will be very light because the client isn't really considering any other options. The only question is whether they are prepared to accept your fee. So there are two situations in which there isn't really a sales conversation at all. But in many other situations, you will find yourself in a sales conversation. And when you're in those situations, if you master the sales conversation structure, which I'll share with you in a moment, this is a huge advantage. Because the truth is that there are lots of very good lawyers out there. Most of them are likely to do a great job. So it's in how you handle the sales conversation that you win the business. And if you master the structure, you will feel so much more confident. As I mentioned a moment ago, well before you find yourself in a sales conversation, there is some work to do. And that work is knowing what your differentiated value is. Differentiated value is all the things that make you different and more valuable compared to all the other lawyers and other solutions out there for your ideal client. You need to know your differentiated value because that's the way clients think. They aren't making a choice in a vacuum. They're deciding between different options, between you and other lawyers, between you and doing it in-house, between you and potentially other professionals, consultants, accountants, etc. Okay, that's been a long preliminary, and now I'd like to get into the main point of this episode and provide you with a very simple structure that you will be able to remember and apply no matter what sales conversation you find yourself in. Professional salespeople have multi-part structures that they script, rehearse, and refine over time, and you don't need to do this. To start off, this simple structure is more than enough to get you through. The sales conversation has 4 parts. Firstly, understanding the client's perfect world, and we'll talk in a moment about what perfect world means. Secondly, proving that you can provide that perfect world. Or, as I said before, deciding to walk away. Thirdly, dealing with objections. And fourthly, keeping control of the sale. So, understanding their perfect world, proving you can provide it, objections, and keeping control of the sale. Here's the first part. You have 3 objectives in the first part of the sales conversation. You need to understand their issue, you need to understand what they're looking for in a law firm, and you need to establish your credibility. In order to understand their issue, you need to really listen. And when we're great at relationship building, which a lot of women lawyers are, we can be naturally brilliant at this part of the conversation. We use active listening. We summarize what the client has just said. We repeat the last few words they said just to keep them talking. That's the first objective. The second objective is to understand not only their problem, but also what they're looking for in a law firm and in a lawyer. What's important to them? Is it the size of the firm? Is it the price? Is it the level of expertise? So, for example, are they looking for the specialist on this particular point? Or are they happy to work with someone who will do a good enough job at a reasonable price? It is vital to know what they're looking for in a lawyer and a law firm because it helps you to know whether you are the right firm for them. The third objective in this first part of the conversation is, especially as a woman, you need to establish your credibility early. This is the answer to the question I asked before. How do younger women lawyers establish their credibility with older men? Research shows that relationship builders can be the worst salespeople because they don't ever challenge the client. Research shows that the best salespeople are those who make the client feel slightly ill when they realize what risks they're taking. However, the idea of challenging the client has a very masculine energy to it. And for women, challenging a client can be tricky, as if they challenge too hard, they can be labelled aggressive or pushy. So how do you establish your credibility without challenging the client, or at least without challenging them aggressively? Here are 3 ways. The easiest way is by asking the right questions and asking your questions in a way that shows your expertise. So you might say something like, that's one way forward. I'm really curious, have you considered X? In my experience, it often makes a big difference in situations like this. You might also want to ground your comments in evidence and say things like, in a recent deal of this type, this is what happened. Or, we've seen regulators pay particular attention to this. Or, this is how this tends to play out in court. This moves the conversation away from your opinion versus theirs and instead shows you're plugged into the broader market. And then you can acknowledge what they say and then add your perspective. So you might say something like, yeah, that's a great point. And we've also seen situations where XYZ. By using the word and, you are less likely to be perceived as oppositional. And you can still introduce your expertise. You can even say and when you're saying exactly the opposite of what they've just said. And of course, you can use this technique in a whole lot of situations, not just sales conversations, because it means that the other person will continue to listen to. So there are just 3 ways to ensure that you establish your credibility without challenging the client aggressively. Once you have really understood their issue and you have really understood what sort of lawyer or firm they're looking for, the next step is to summarize. Summarize their issue to make sure you have fully understood it. And then you might say something like, in a perfect world, you are looking for a lawyer who understands your business and will do a decent job without charging you over-the-top rates. Or, in a perfect world, because this is such an important, complex issue with such a huge impact on your business, you are looking for an ultra specialist. Or, in a perfect world, you need a lawyer who will help preserve the relationship between you and your husband after the divorce, and who will not only deal with the legal side of things, but who will also bring their emotional intelligence to the table. And when you've summarized, you need to get them to confirm both that you have understood their issue and that you have understood what they're looking for in a lawyer and in a law firm. And once they've confirmed that, that's the end of the first part of the sales conversation. And if they don't confirm, then either you need to circle back and ask more questions, or you need to walk away. Because at this point, you will know if you are what they're looking for. And if you're not, there's no point trying to prove that you are. You remember we spoke about the perfect world a second ago? Well, the second part of the conversation is all about proving that you can provide their perfect world. From this point onwards, you need to bring a different energy to the conversation. In the first part of the conversation, you will have a receptive, listening energy. You won't be talking too much. You'll be asking lots of questions. Physically, you might be leaning forward, looking at your client. But in the second part of the conversation, you sit up straighter. This indicates that you're going to take control. You talk more. Perhaps you talk more loudly. You're more assertive and make stronger claims. Your energy in the second part of the conversation is very different. As I said before, the client will be comparing you with other alternatives, which means that in this part of the conversation, you need to quickly provide details of various deals you've worked on and the CVs of your team. And then you need to spend a lot of time helping them to make their choice by focusing on your differentiated value. What you do better than the alternatives the client might be considering. So it's not about putting your competitors down and saying things like, we are a far better firm than X, Y, and Z partners. It's about comparing different approaches to the problem. So you might say something like, unlike the multinational law firms, we're a small firm. We understand the issues faced by small businesses. And in particular, we understand that it is absolutely critical for you that our fees stay within budget. Or you might say, unlike other firms, in addition to being lawyers, we are also trained mediators, which means that we focus on preserving the relationship between the shareholders. We find that this approach minimises litigation and legal costs and is generally far happier for everyone involved. So that's the second part of the conversation, proving how you are the best alternative compared to all the others and helping your client make that choice. The third part of the sales conversation is about addressing objectives. When someone challenges you or objects, it can feel very threatening. You can start to go into tailspin and start to think, they've already decided they're going to say no, or I have to do whatever it takes to save the sale. And this is why it is so important to do the work beforehand and understand exactly what your unique value is. Because when you do that, you're in a far better place when they do start to object. When they do that, you don't crumble or cave to the client's demands. The truth is, if someone is thinking of saying no, they won't object. They will smile and say, "Thank you so much for your time," and walk away. If someone is objecting, it means that they are seriously considering you. If they work in an organisation, they're probably thinking about all the questions their boss or the business people are going to ask them. And if they're an individual, they're probably thinking about their partner. So objections are great news. And one of the biggest objections, of course, is price. And this is what is usually discussed in that post-online RFP coffee I referred to earlier. If you know in your bones that what you provide is incredibly valuable for this particular client, that you are the person to provide it to them, then you can switch the discussion from price to value. You want to start talking to them about how much working with you will save them in the long term, or how much they will potentially win if they do win the court case, or whatever it might be. You compare your fee with the potential risks or the potential gains, and suddenly it won't seem like so much. If you're hearing the same objections over and over again, you might actually want to raise them yourself and address them, and that's another way of establishing your credibility. And as a woman lawyer, you might even decide to explicitly raise the issue that you're a woman and say something like, I know this might sound a little bit odd, but as a woman, I find it more difficult to establish my credibility. But at the same time, I know I can do a great job. Would it be okay if I shared some testimonials with you to reassure you? So that's the end of the third step. And the fourth step involves taking control of what happens next. You absolutely do not want to leave it hanging. You absolutely do not want the client to say, "Okay, I'll get back to you," without setting a time to speak again or without understanding what's happening next. You might, for example, ask what the internal validation process is, how long it's likely to last, who needs to be involved, and set up a follow-up call within a reasonable period. If it's appropriate, you might even presume the sale and get them to sign the contract there and then. So that's it. The sales conversation in 4 simple steps. Let's just run over them quickly again. The first part is all about listening, seeking to understand their problem, what they're looking for in a lawyer or a firm. It's also about establishing your credibility early in the conversation. At the end of the first part, you summarize their issue and set out their perfect world, what they're ideally looking for in a lawyer. And then your energy changes. In the second part, you help them make sense of alternative approaches and to prove that you correspond to the perfect world they have confirmed they are looking for. You sit up straight, you talk a lot, assertively take control of the conversation. The third part is all about dealing with objections. And finally, you need to keep control of the next steps. As I said before, sales professionals write sales scripts, practice them and refine them over time. So next time you're going to speak to a client about a potential job, why not pretend to be a salesperson? Why not run through the structure I've just shared with you and even say it out loud? And when you practice enough, you will walk into that conversation with a quiet confidence, which is perhaps the best selling technique of all. Just before we go, I'd like to give you a weird sales tip from a book called Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. Robert Cialdini talks about how we are much more influenced by extraneous factors than we might think. As a woman lawyer, you might want to use this to your advantage in order to overcome any unconscious bias that the person you are talking to might have about women. You might, for example, include photos in your pitch of great female lawyers. Think Christine Lagarde, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Michelle Obama. Or perhaps a quote from a great female lawyer. These unconscious factors have far more impact than you would expect. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me on the Pathway to Partnership podcast. I hope that you now have a framework that will give you more confidence for your next sales conversation. If you found this episode useful, please share it with a colleague or leave a rating or review. It really helps other women lawyers find the show. And if you'd like to go deeper, you can find resources and ways to work with me at ceciliapoullain.com. So until next time, remember, you don't have to do this on your own. You get to define success as a woman lawyer on your own terms. Thanks for listening.